Now, flushed with the excess of the war and the conquering of all the nations of the world, the Allied forces, headed up by the Americans, immediately moved into Japan to rebuild and strengthen and create the economy of Japan after the war, to supply the military forces with the cameras and equipment that were needed to continue the fight for world hegemony, really, as they continued to fight the Chinese and the Russians. The Chinese, first of all, in the Korean War, and the Cold War, of course, and the fight against all communism, really, which they labelled as the opposite. It was capitalism and communism in those days, and now it's democracy versus autocracy. They just changed the words. It's the same old thing, really. It's world hegemony. And so the way to world hegemony is economic domination. And so that's exactly what they did in Japan. And they must have taken the drawings and the engineering drawings and stuff like that into Japan and set up Nippon Kogaku to make the Nikon camera, which they did. They started to produce an exact copy, more or less, of this camera, except it had the different shutter that had been developed. Canon, before the war, just before the war actually, Canon had started to make Leica cameras, and I think Nippon Kogaku, the lens maker, they assisted them in this respect, and they were paying the Germans, because they were allied with the Germans during the war, they were paying the Germans their patent dues, because the Germans were shouldering the responsibility, if you like, of the research and development into all this stuff, and the patent laws were really designed to protect the children of the future, you know, that all of the country had put in this investment, and it was, the rewards of that were reaped by the children of the future. And so, at the end of the war, the Western globalists decided that they would just delete the German patents as the country was, quote, quote, no longer exist. But the people existed. And so who they were really stealing from was the children of the future. And the land also, they were stealing that from the children of the future, because without the land, without the assets of the country, how can the country live and have an economic life? And so they were stealing the economic life of the future German peoples, really. And they took that to Japan and gave it to the Japanese. So you can see how the Japanese benefited, because they had the Japanese under their control. And so, really, the Japanese camera is a development, if you like, of the German camera industry from Dresden. I'll enjoy my morning hot chocolate, and we'll come back for round two. Well, it's a bit cold in here, so I'll put the heater on and my hat on. The effects of the war, of course. Right, so the first two camera companies to be created by the globalists were the Nikon country, it's the biggest company in the country, really, as far as camera production goes. And that was to create professional cameras, and to create a kind of a people's cheaper camera. They created the Zeiss Contax company, and started to produce exact copies of the East German cameras. And now I'll put some photographs up of these cameras as we talk about it. And so you can see they start with the rangefinder camera and the single X reflex camera without the pentaprism, and as the pentaprism evolves in East Germany in 1948, 49, they come out with the first pentaprism camera in the 1950s. Takes them a little while, they're a little bit behind the East Germans, because they have to, first of all, East Germans have to design it, and then they have to copy it, you know. And you have to realise not the Japanese copying it, these are Americans, you know, with all the CIA and all that sort of stuff. And so it's a funny story, really. And this camera really is a documentary proof that this happened, really. This kind of lens mechanism here wasn't on any other camera, really. And it's interesting, they had a system whereby the mount, you could take the 50mm lens off. How do we do that? Oh, here, we've got to do this here, I think. It's a bit of a system. Oh, no. There we go, it turns the other way. Alright, so the 50mm lens comes off, and I'll come a bit closer, and you can see that there's another mount, bayonet mount, on the outside, and the larger lenses that needed more support, this was too small an area, go on the outside and use their own focusing mechanism. So this was quite a specific mechanism, really, and patented. That's it, patented. And so this was all copied. And you could put these lenses on a Nikon. You could put them on there. And then they got Life magazine in and did big stories about how great the Nikon lenses were and all the rest of the drama, you know, and sort of sold the whole lot to photojournalists, who were the first people, if you like, to bring in these Nikon cameras into the eyes of the world to get the general public interested in buying them. And so there was a whole propaganda campaign there to try to sell off, to get this industry moving. And the Miranda company at the time, they were making, I don't think they were involved so much in all of this, they were making pieces that fitted between the body and the lens. And they eventually, in the 1950s, developed their own wonderful Miranda camera, which was taken over by the Allied Impex company. Allied import, export, must have been something to do with the war effort in the beginning, and eventually found its way into private hands in America. And they took over the company Miranda and destroyed it, really. I spoke of that in the other video. And so, and at the same time, Asahi Pentax had, Asahi Optical Company had produced the Asahi Flex, and then the Asahi Pentax, and then the Spotmatic and stuff. This was a direct copy, if you like, of the Praktica line of cameras. And the Nikon F was really a continuation of the Praktina, which was the system camera. The system camera. I put a bit of lubrication on this, it wasn't working before. And so this whole idea of this comes from East Germany, and the Praktina is the first one to do this, to have interchangeable battery. And they copied this whole idea, and they created the Nikon F. And from the Nikon F, I'll put some pictures up of that, the Nikon F, and then they made the photomic head with the Nikon F, which is similar to this Exakta model here, although I feel the Exakta is superior. The Exakta, of course, is a bit later on. But the Nikon F came out, and then the Nikomat. And the Nikomat was, if you like, the crowning glory of Nikon, because what happened with the Nikon F, it was a bit shoddily made. The housing at the top here used to fall off. The actual mechanism to hold it on was nowhere near the quality of this camera, which has the wonderful sliding mechanism, beautiful mechanism, can never fall off this. And it makes the top and the camera body one piece, and the same with the Praktina. A very, very beautiful design, and but unfortunately the Nikon F just sort of clicked in, and these things could wear and on a hook, and in the end you had forever the photomic head was falling off the Nikon. But that problem was sorted by having the same design as the original Pentacon or Contax S model, from which it was a direct copy, if you like. This is the most beautiful camera ever made, I believe, the Pentacon F, and this one is attempting to copy it. Also the weights are interesting, how this one is too heavy, and you know, the Three Bears, it was too hot and it was too cold and it was just right. This camera is just right as far as balance and hang goes, especially with the aluminium lens, which made it a remarkably amazing camera from a balance point of view. Okay, so at such an early date too, and the Nikon F was a very heavy camera, yet it was good for making war. You know, if you wanted to go to war, you could kill the enemy with it. And so this was taken to, this was first used, I think this one, I'm open to correction, I think in the Korean War, Vietnam, places like this, this was a camera that survived the battles, if you like. And this one is battle scarred. Somebody's dropped this, and if you drop one of these on the lens is finished. This one doesn't turn anymore. Because the weight of the camera is so heavy, it's such a heavy camera. And yeah, so the lens balance and so on. Okay. So with the full force of Life magazine, National Geographic and all of the propaganda press of the globalists behind them, what do you expect except that the camera industry of Japan dominates the world? And whilst at the same time they're fighting court cases against these guys who are just trying to make their cameras and sell them, and they've got the full force of the entire global world, if you like, against them. And so, you know, I'm always rooting for the little guy. You know, I love the whole world, but it's the people running it that I don't like, and I don't care where you find them, whether you find them in China or Japan or Russia or England or America. You know, the bad guys are the bad guys. Yeah, they're always disguised as the good guys, and so you can see the bad guys by what they do. If the bad guys are like, if the guys doing the work are freeing the people and giving the people everything to help them economically and everything, and spending their money on helping them because they're rich, of course, they're the good guys. But if they're stealing stuff and taking the land and taking the minerals and taking their economic assets and destroying the lives of the people and turning them into economic slaves, these are the bad guys. And so you need to know, well, you know, I'm sure you know. Okay, and so, but we're talking about the camera industry here, but we can't talk about it and understand it without discussing this unfortunate issue, I suppose. Anyway, a number of camera companies developed after Nikon, but I'm not going to go into all that because that's pretty much well-known history. What isn't known is this origin of it all, and so this is what I'm more interested in because it relates to the documentary that we're doing here is the GDR camera history. And so the Japanese have a big part to play in that history, and of course Miranda was destroyed in the same way as Contax. The East German Contax was destroyed by changing its name to some bad brand and trying to destroy it this way, and it was destroyed. And so, and Nikon were the great winners of all of this. Now, it's very difficult to find anything in English about the origin of the creation of the Nikon company. So a lot of this that I'm saying is speculation, really, but it's speculation based on the reality of the products that came out of it. And so I think there's a certain amount of truth in what I'm saying, in the fact that these cameras actually exist in the short time frame that they did exist in. And they didn't just take the camera, they improved them, but they improved them by incorporating multiple changes, like for example the winding leaves and so on. There were different companies with different patents with different pieces, and because they got rid of all the patents, they could just make the cameras any way they wanted without paying any royalties. So you can see how this gave them a tremendous advantage and caused great success of the Japanese camera industry at the expense of the East German camera industry, and in the end the West German camera industry, because they also were beaten by the Japanese. They couldn't create this camera, the camera to compete against this in the West. They could do it in the East, and they did it in the East with the Praktica. Yet they didn't have the international marketing arm, propaganda arm if you like, of the globalists, and so they were not able to generate the revenues they should have done from their sales, so that they could continue their research and development and create even better cameras than this. It's enough. And so I hope you enjoy the videos. This video is, I'm not going to talk any more about the Japanese camera industry, and we're going to continue with what happened at the end when the Cold War came to a close and the Berlin Wall fell down, and what happened to the camera industry in East Germany then.